Welcome to TSAT. Today we are here to discuss paper 2 for degree lecturer and paper 3 for junior lecturer economics under Gurukula Udyoga guide. I am Dr. Seema Ghosh and with me I have Jyothi Mehra as the associate to discuss the paper. So today we are discussing 10 courses under economics, which includes microeconomics, macroeconomics, public finance, international economics, economics of development and growth, Indian economy, Telangana economy, quantitative methods for economic analysis, banking, and economics of infrastructure and economics of investment. The paper of economics is for a duration of 2 hours, consisting 100 questions with a negative marking of 1/4. So now we will start with the first course, which is called as microeconomics. So before actually we start with the microeconomics, these are the different types of questions which are expected to be asked in the degree lecturer or junior lecturer examination. It includes multiple choice questions, match the following, sequence based questions, and also assertions and reasoning based questions. So we start with the first course, which includes microeconomics, and every course in economics will have 5 modules or 5 units. So under microeconomics we have the first module, which is the demand analysis. So first of all, before we go to demand analysis, economics is divided into 2 branches, micro and macroeconomics. Micro consists of the study of individual units and macro is consisting of the study of aggregates. For example, micro units include individuals, producers, firms, industry. And when we talk about macroeconomics, it includes the study of national income, inflation, employment, poverty, etc. So when we come to the concept of demand, so demand is nothing but we are talking about the desire for the consumer to buy a commodity backed by the willingness as well as the ability to pay. And law of demand is nothing but it is showing the relationship between the price and the quantity demanded, and this relationship is inverse in nature. So the main determinant of demand is its own price. So when we say inverse relationship, as the price of the commodity increases, the demand for the commodity will decrease. Similarly, if the price of the commodity increases, the quantity demanded by the consumer will decrease. And when you talk about the other part from the producer side, we have the supply and we have the law of supply under the same. Law of supply is nothing but it is showing the direct relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. So for the producer, if the price is increasing, he is ready to sell more quantity in the market, and if there is a decrease in the price, he will sell less quantity in the market. Apart from demand and supply, we also have the concept of elasticity of demand. Elasticity of demand is nothing but we are talking about, it measures the responsiveness of the change in the quantity demanded as compared to the change in the price. So demand is giving us the directional change, but elasticity of demand will be talking about the degree of responsiveness. So under price elasticity, we have 5 different types. One is the elastic demand, second is the inelastic demand, then we have the perfectly elastic demand, imperfectly elastic demand, and then we have the unitary elastic demand. Then we come to the second unit, which is the utility analysis. Utility analysis, when you talk about utility, utility is divided into 2, cardinal utility and the ordinal utility. Cardinal utility means that the utility or the satisfaction derived after the consumption of a commodity can be measured in numbers, but in reality it is not so. We talk about ordinal utility, wherein we can give the preferences to the commodities according to the satisfaction derived. And when you talk about law of DMU is nothing but we talk about the as we consume the commodity more and more, the additional utility derived from the consumption goes on decreasing. And then we have under ordinal utility, we have the indifference curve analysis. Under indifference curve is nothing but we are talking about the combination of two commodities which gives the consumer the same level of satisfaction. The price effect is divided into the income effect and the substitution effect. Income effect is nothing but we are talking about as the price increases, the real income or the purchasing power of the consumer will reduce and vice versa. And substitution means as a consumer we will always prefer to buy a cheaper commodity as compared to a costlier commodity. Similarly, when we talk about the production is nothing but we are talking about the transformation of inputs into the output. In economics, when you define inputs, they are broadly classified as land, labor, capital and entrepreneur. So we combine these four factors of production and we take the production process. So when the relationship between the two, technical relationship between the inputs and output is called as production function. And we have two laws under the same law of variable proportion, which is the law which is the short run production function, and then we have the long run production function under which we study the law of returns to scale. So when you say short run production function, some factors are fixed, some are variable. In long run, all the factors of production are fixed. Then we have cost analysis. Automatically when we talk about production process, there will be cost involved in the production. So the relationship between the cost and the output is what we talk about cost analysis. Similarly, when the producer produces the output, he will be selling the same in the market, what we call it as revenue, and the revenue is calculated by multiplying the price, that is the selling price, into the quantity sold in the market. Then we talk about the market analysis. Market analysis is nothing but we are talking about in the subject, we divide the market into four mainly, which includes perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition and oligopoly, and this market will have its own characteristics. When you talk about perfect competition, if you talk about, it has large number of sellers and these large number of sellers are selling homogeneous product in the market. But on the other hand, when we talk about the other extreme, which is monopoly market is nothing but we are talking about single seller in the total industry. So he has the total monopoly, he has the total control of everything in the market. On the other hand, we have monopolistic market structure. Monopolistic market structure is categorized by the large number of sellers, but here these sellers are selling differentiated goods. When we say differentiated goods, it means that we are able to differentiate the commodities on the basis of color, on the basis of quality, on the basis of size, etc. So we are able to differentiate one commodity to another commodity on these basis. On the other hand, when we talk about oligopoly market structure is categorized where the sellers, there are only few sellers in the market. So when you talk about the aviation industry, we have only few sellers in the market. When you talk about the mobile industry, there are few sellers in the market. So these are the examples for oligopoly. Apart from that, we also have another market where we call it as duopoly. Duopoly, as the name suggests, it has only two sellers in the market. So the equilibrium will be on the basis of the interaction between the demand and supply in the perfect competition. And when you talk about other market structure, the equilibrium condition is where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost, and the marginal cost is going to cut the marginal revenue from below. When we talk about the factor price analysis, so as I told you before that there are four factors of production: land, labor, capital and entrepreneur. So when they are employed by the producer, they are paid the income, and income is categorized as rent, wages, profit and interest. So this is for the first unit, and we can see that we have certain questions which we have just put it as a model questions which you can look into it. So when we look into the first question, we are talking about the law of downward sloping demand can be explained in the terms of. So the answer is substitution and income effect. So price effect is divided into income and the substitution effect. So that is the answer for the multiple choice question. Similarly, when you talk about the slope of the isocost line, the slope of the isocost line is nothing but we are talking about the marginal rate of technical substitution. That is the rate at which two factors can be substituted to each other. Similarly, when we talk about the example of an oligopoly market structure, among all the options which is given here, we have the cigarette industry, which qualifies as an oligopoly market structure because we have only few sellers in that particular industry. All other options, there are large number of sellers in the market. We go to the second course, which is called as macroeconomics. So as I told you, we divide economics into micro and macro. Macro is nothing but the study of aggregate economic variables in the economy. Aggregate, as I told you, we talk about national income, we talk about investment, we talk about consumption, we talk about money, we talk about inflation, we talk about business cycles, etc. So when we talk about national income analysis, national income is nothing but we are talking about the aggregate of the incomes earned by the people of the country, and there are three methods for the measurement of national income, which includes the product or the output method, income method, and the expenditure method. So when we also talk about the circular flow of income, so one thing we should be very clear students. The first is that whatever we are spending, whatever we spend, which is our expenditure, becomes the income of the other person. So as an individual, if I am buying a commodity, I am spending the commodity, it becomes the income of whosoever is selling. So that is how the income is circulating in the economy, and it goes from one sector to the other sector. So when we talk about circular flow, we talk about that how the income moves from the household sector to the firm sector, or we talk about the government sector, or we talk about the external sector. Similarly, when you talk about the income and employment theories, so classical theory is best described by the Say's laws of market, which says that supply creates its own demand, because whenever there is production, there is the generation of income for the factors of production, and this income is spent for buying goods and services. So this particular statement, as supply creates its own demand, is for the classical economies. But after the world depression of 1930s, we had the Keynesian theory of interest and employment, and there he had given the importance of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. When you talk about aggregate demand and aggregate supply, that is the point of equilibrium, and he said that for the growth of the economy, it is important to have the importance of consumption as well as investment. Investment, we are talking about investment as real investment in building the infrastructure of the economy, so that it generates more income as well as employment in the economy. Similarly, when we talk about investments, so investments done by a businessman for his business is, according to Keynesian theory, is dependent upon two factors. One is the interest rates, which he has to pay for his borrowed money. Second is the marginal efficiency of capital. Marginal efficiency of capital is best explained in terms of what is the rate of return on his investment. So if the rate of return on his investment is more, then he will go ahead with the investment, and when the rate of investment is less as compared to the money which he is paying as interest, then he will not go ahead with the investment. Similarly, when you talk about the demand and supply of money, now demand for money mainly in the economy is for the transaction purposes, that is, we demand money in the economy for buying goods and services. But when you talk about the supply, supply is by the central bank or by the government of the country. And in India, when we talk about the measurement of money, it has four measurement, which we called it as M1, M2, M3 and M4. These are the four measurements of money supply in the economy. Similarly, we talk about inflation and trade cycles also. So when you talk about trade cycles, we are talking about business cycles. In any economy, there are four phases of business cycles, which is categorized as prosperity, or we talk about recession, followed maybe by depression and recovery stage. These are the four stages or phases of business cycle, and every stage will have its own characteristics. Now when we talk about that, Indian economy during pandemic had actually gone into recession. So there were so many policies which were taken out by the government to revive the economy. So recession, after recession there was recovery, and slowly we are more recovering, and we are trying that we come into the prosperity stage. When you talk about inflation, inflation is nothing but we talk about the rise in price, and rise in price is categorized either there are two types of inflation, cost push inflation or demand pull inflation. So students, keep one thing in mind, inflation is when the demand is more than the supply. So demand is when there is more demand in the market than the supply, it is called as demand pull inflation. And because of the increase in the prices, what is happening is that the producers also will increase their prices, and this is because of the increase in the cost of production. So that is what is categorized cost. One is inflation because of the increase in the cost, and one is inflation because of the increase in the demand. So if you look into the questions, so we have various concepts of national income. So we talk about the net national product. This is a concept, NNP. So if we have to calculate NNP from GNP, that is gross national product, we can calculate that is national income minus the depreciation. So if we minus depreciation, we will always get net. Depreciation has to be deducted from the gross, then we get the concept of net national income or net national product. Similarly, this is example on consumption function. This question is on consumption function. Consumption function will have the two concept of marginal propensity to consume and average propensity to consume. And when you talk about average propensity and marginal propensity to consume will always be equal to 1. Sorry, marginal propensity to consume plus the marginal propensity to save will always be equal to 1. Similarly, average propensity to consume plus the average propensity to save will be equal to 1. So if you look into this question, students, when MPC is equal to 0.80, automatically the APS, that is APS should be 0.20. When APC is equal to 0.95, then APS will be equal to 0.05, because together they equals to 1. Similarly, when you talk about near money, here we are having an example for near money until multiple choice. So near money is nothing but we are talking about those assets which can be easily converted into cash. So out of all these listed in the multiple choice, bonds and debentures are those assets which cannot be converted easily into cash as compared to other three options given. The third one is we have public finance. Students, I think so all of you should understand, when you talk about public finance is nothing but we are talking about the public revenue and the public expenditure of the government. So every year the government is presenting the budget on 1st of February in the parliament, and they will also present what are the expected revenue and what are the expected expenditure for the next financial year. Whatever expenditure the government is making, they follow the principle of maximum social advantage, which means that the whatever expenditure, it should be maximum, should have maximum social benefit for the most of the people in the economy. So when you talk about public revenue, now the sources of public revenue is nothing but the taxes. So that is the main source of revenue to the government, and taxes are divided into two, direct taxes and indirect taxes. So whenever we are buying a commodity, we pay the GST to the government, and GST again is divided into that goods and services tax is divided into central GST and SGST, that is state GST. So when we are buying a commodity, we pay the tax to the government, which is called as indirect tax. But when you talk about if we are paying the tax on our income, that is called as direct taxes. Apart from this source of income, the government also will have non-tax sources of income, which may include in the form of penalty, which may include in the form of different types of fees. Similarly, when you talk about the expenditure broadly in economics, we divide into two, developmental expenditure and non-developmental expenditure. So whatever the government is spending to maintain its administration, because when you talk about government administration, it includes administration related to law and order, it includes administration related to defense forces, and government itself will have so many ministries and departments through which the government will administer its policies. So the government will be spending some amount of money to for this administration, and government also spends money for building infrastructure in the economy. Infrastructure can be government spending for building roads, government providing better communication facilities, government providing better electricity. So all these are called as developmental expenditure. So some part of the expenditure will be to run the government, some part of the expenditure is to make the infrastructure in the economy. Similarly, when we talk about the fiscal policy is nothing but we are talking about again the same, about the revenue and the expenditure of the government. So government will try to increase its revenue, and government for the growth process will also try to also increase its expenditure. So when you talk about that, there are certain taxes which are levied by the central government, but the money is distributed among the states. So in India we have an organization which is called as Finance Commission, and it's been set up by the president of the country once in every 5 years. So Finance Commission and the members of the Finance Commission will decide that how the revenue of the government should be distributed among the center and the states. Similarly, as I have told you students, budget, every year the government of India will present the budget in the parliament, that is central budget, but every state in the country will also present their budget in the legislative assemblies. And when we talk about the budget is divided into two, revenue account and the capital account. Revenue account will have the items which is related to the items which are recurring in nature, and the capital account will have those entries which are mainly for the infrastructure building. And we are regulated, that is we are regulated by the FRBM Act, which is Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, which means that we talk about different types of deficits. In the budget we will have the budgetary deficit, we have the fiscal deficit, we have the revenue deficit and the capital deficit. So this fiscal deficit is being fixed under the FRBM Act, and it is fixed at 3% of the GDP. So the government tries its best to keep the fiscal deficit to minimum which is allowed under the FRBM Act. So these are the questions again students related to public finance, and we have talking about the 4 canons of taxation, which includes the equality, certainty, convenience and economy, which is given by Adam Smith. So these are the 4 main principles of taxation which is given by Adam Smith, and it is applicable even today. It's been given around more than 200 years back, but it is applicable even today. Similarly, when you talk about, these are student sequence type questions, when we have to talk about the state taxes, that is we are talking about Telangana taxes. If you have to put it in ascending order, it means that from where the government gets maximum revenue. So the answer is D. It means that the government gets maximum revenue from state excise, then the second is central sales tax, the third is from stamps and registration charges, and the last is the taxes on vehicles. So if you get these types of questions students, you have to see that what is the sequence which is the correct sequence, and accordingly you should mark your answer. Now we have the 4th one, which is international economics. International economics, we are talking about mainly the first unit, which includes international trade, and I think so all of you understand when you talk about international trade, we are talking about the trade between the nations. On the other hand, domestic trade is nothing but the trade within the country. So if there is a trade between Telangana and Karnataka, it is domestic trade, but if India is exporting and importing from US, then it is called as international trade. And the theories of international trade starts from mercantilism, then Adam Smith, and Adam Smith is the classical economist, and he propagated the free trade between the nations. Free trade between the nations, which means that there should not be any barriers to trade. And then we have the trade theories given by Ricardo, and we have the HO theory, which is called as Heckscher-Holland theory. So the main reason according to these theories is why there is trade between the nations. There is trade between the nations mainly because the factors of productions are not equally distributed among the countries. Like if you talk about India as a country, India has more of labor. If you talk about US has more of capital. So what happens is that India will produce those commodities which require more of labor much more cheaply as compared to US. Similarly, US will produce those commodities more cheaply which requires more of capital. So that is where the trade will happen between the two nations. When we talk about barriers to trade, students, barriers to trade is nothing but we talk about the restrictions between the trade. In reality, there is no free trade. Free trade will only happen if there is some economic integration. Like we talk about economic integration, I think so you have heard about EU, European Union. European Union is an economic integration. There is free trade between the nations who are the members of European Union. Otherwise, there is trade restrictions or barriers to trade, and those barriers to trade can be classified as tariffs and non-tariff barriers. Tariffs we talk about, these are custom duties or these are the duties which we have to pay when we are importing the commodities, and non-tariff will not be included in duties, but it is beyond the duties which can be related to quality, which can be related to technical specifications also. Similarly, when you talk about balance of payments, students, balance of payments is nothing but every country in the world will make its BOP, that is balance of payments account. Whatever we are importing or whatever we are buying from outside for which we are paying in foreign currency will be recorded on the debit side of the BOP account. And whatever we are receiving in foreign currency, now if we are exporting our goods and services and we receive the same in foreign currency, that we gets recorded in the credit side of the balance of payment account. So every year the country is going to prepare its balance of payment account. So if we are paying in international currency, that is recorded in the debit side. If we are receiving money in foreign currency, we are recording it on the credit side. So every year the debit and the credit should be equal to each other. If they are not equal to each other, if we are spending more, that is debit is more than the credit, we call it as deficit in BOP account. But if we have the credit side more than the debit, we say it's a surplus in BOP account. We can also divide the BOP account as the balance of current account and the balance of capital account. Similarly, students, when you talk about the exchange rate is nothing but we are talking about the exchange rate between the two currencies. When we say $1 is equal to 80 rupees, so that is what we call it as exchange rate. And the exchange rate, every country will follow different types of exchange rate, but broadly it is divided into fixed exchange rate and flexible exchange rate. So most of the countries nowadays will be following the fixed exchange rate system, and India also follow the same. And when you talk about the monetary system, students, in international monetary system, we are talking about international financial institutions, which includes mainly the IMF, International Monetary Fund. This is the institution which will give funding to the nations if the nations will have deficit in its balance of payments. Similarly, World Bank, which is in short called as IBRD, International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, these are the banks which will fund projects mainly in the developing countries. Similarly, IDA, these are the various institutions which are being formed and established for funding various activities in the world economy. Apart from student that, we have an other important organization which we call it as WTO, that is World Trade Organization, which was formed after converting GATT into WTO on January 1, 1995. So there are WTO means around 157 members of the countries are the members of WTO, which is more or less covering the 98% of the world, and it's an important organization which is regulating, I will not say regulating, which is for the free trade between the countries, so that there is increase in the income and output of the nations. So, if you look into these questions, students, pertaining to the international economics syllabus, we have just taken one. When we talk about if one country is imposing tariffs or duties, so what is the result? So, when a country, suppose India have imposed duties on its import, then it will benefit a country, that is India. But if the other country retaliate, then it may not have that much of benefit. Similarly, when you talk about liberalization, globalization, privatization in India started in 1991. When we talk about free trade, so these are, students, example of various economic integration. We call it as preferential trading agreement or free trade area, custom unions, custom market. Custom union is the European Union is the example of custom union. So, here free trade will take place under which of these integration? So, it will be only under free trade area, custom union and common market. Preferential trading agreement does not include free trade. Similarly, this is just for the establishment dates. So, we are talking about which of the following is not matched correctly. So, ASEAN again is an organization, it's an economic integration organization formed in 1967. NAFTA is an economic integration organization in in North America, formed in 1994. Then EEC is related to European Union, and we have SAARC, which is related to South Asian countries, and it was not formed in 1975. So, you should also have some knowledge of these organizations which they were established, so that it can come under match the following also. So, I will now request Jyothi Mehra to continue with the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Seema. Now we move on to the fifth module that we have in our economics paper 2, economics of development and growth. So, we start with the first concept there, which is about socio-economics and institutional aspects about growth and development. We need to understand as to what is the main difference between economic growth and economic development. Economic development is a much wider concept. It takes a lot of time, lot of years for development of an economy to take place, whereas economic growth is something which is only on a year-on-year basis. When the national income of an economy increases, we say that the growth of the country is rising. And as you have heard from Dr. Seema about national income in the macroeconomic module, where the overall production in the economy from all different sectors increases, we say that the growth of the economy is there. But when we talk about the development, we take into consideration various other social factors, socio-economic factors, such as whether people are able to get uplifted below the poverty line, are they getting enough benefits, other facilities in terms of good water supply, good sanitation, education, and is the infant mortality reduced. So, all these factors have to be considered when we are taking into consideration economic development. So, economic development is ultimately connected to sustainable development, wherein we are not compromising the abilities or the resource use of the future generations and using up all the resources in the present generation. So, we have to leave resources for the future generation to take care of their needs and requirements also. And both these concepts of sustainable development and economic development are ultimately connected to inclusive growth, where you are giving the benefits of the growth, the shared growth to everybody in the society, and opportunities to all are made available. The second part of growth and development is connected to various factors of economic development. So, you will be listed various factors of economic development, such as whether we are reducing the other factors which are hindering growth and development will be considered here. And then we move on to the theory of demographic transition, which is given by Malthus. The basic proposition of Malthusian theory of population is on the fact that the food supply increases at an arithmetic rate, but the population growth increases at a geometric progression. which means that the growth of food in the economy is not sufficient to meet the requirements of the growing population. And he also speaks about the impact of natural resources and economic development on population. Now, looking at the different theories of economic growth and development, we have a few theories given by Adam Smith, Ricardo, J.S. Mill. The main idea behind Adam Smith's theory of economic growth is he has taken two factors into consideration. One is division of labor and capital accumulation. These two are the most important factors through which economic growth can be studied. And when we move on to Schumpeter's theory, who focused mainly on innovation, so the basic idea of Schumpeter's theory of development is taking into consideration various innovative improvements and technological improvements in economies. Then moving on to various strategies of economic development, you will be studying about the big push theory, balanced and unbalanced growth. When you go into details about these theories, we need to understand the basic difference between balanced growth theories and unbalanced growth theories. In terms of balanced growth theories, the idea is all the sectors in the economy have to grow simultaneously so that we are reaching the growth level within a few years. As far as the unbalanced growth theory, the proponents of the unbalanced growth theory say that it is not possible for certain countries who have paucity of capital to grow all sectors simultaneously. So they will grow the basic sectors first, infrastructure, and then the other sectors are grown. And as far as India is concerned, we mainly have had our growth pattern using the unbalanced growth theory. Then coming to various growth models, we have the Harrod-Domer growth model, Calder, we have Myrdal's model, choice of techniques. In gist, here we are taking into consideration the techniques of production which are capital intensive and labor intensive. So all the countries will look into the advantages and drawbacks of both capital intensive methods of production as well as the labor intensive methods of production, and they will choose what is suitable to their economies. This module this particular unit, students, is more memory based. So you have to keep in mind various aspects considered by different economists, and the capital output ratio is also considered when we are looking at these growth models of development. Now, a few questions that you can look into is Human Development Index was formulated by UNDP. This is one of the most important indexes taken by all countries in the world to measure the development strategies. They take into consideration the per capita income, mean years of schooling, whether there is reduction in infant mortality or not, and also the education levels and the literacy levels. So this is one very important question that you should understand. You will have a lot of multiple choice questions coming from the Human Development Index also. Then coming on to identifying the measures of development, we have the gross national income, per capita income, changes in production and employment, and the Gini coefficient. So the third option here, which takes into consideration gross national income, your per capita income, and the changes in the production and employment, are all the measures for taking development into consideration. Now we again are matching here. You will also have match the following questions where you have inflation unemployment trade-offs, which was given by A.W. Philip. You have real balance effect, which was given by Don Patinkin. Neoclassical growth model was given by Robert Solow, and your knife edge or instability was given by Harrod Arif. Right? Again, students, this is little bit of memory based questions. Once you are able to understand about each model, what are the basic ideas, what characteristics have been considered in those models, you will be able to answer such match the following questions. And another important aspect to be considered is Adam Smith's theory. As I spoke about the Adam Smith's theory of economic development, he has taken all these factors into consideration, such as laissez-faire economy. Laissez-faire economy is where the role of the government is quite less, and the market forces of demand and supply will take into consideration all the aspects related to production and distribution of goods and services. The invisible hand, that is, it is the market clears on its own. You do not have any restrictions that are created. Free trade policy was discussed by Dr. Seema in the previous module, and the competitive market is where when we have a competitive market, the possibility of price reduction is the highest. That is why all governments across focus on the competitive market rather than markets which are not competitive in nature. Of course, competitive market strategy may not be very realistic, but to whatever extent it is possible, we try to have perfect competition in different areas of production and distribution. Now, coming on to the 6th module on Indian economy. Now, when we talk about the basic structure and the demographic classification of Indian economy, the basic outline that you need to understand is that all countries in the world go through a transition, go through a structural change from the agricultural sector, and then they move on to industrial sector and the service sector. But the structural change that has happened in Indian economy is slightly different from that of the other developed countries, and the structural change that India has taken up is we have moved straight away from the agricultural sector to the service sector. For instance, when we got independent, at that point of time, more than half of India's GDP was contributed by the agricultural sector, and about 30% was contributed by the industrial sector, remaining very less percentage was by the service sector. So as India has grown in these decades, ever since we have got independent, we have moved into a situation where the agricultural sector contribution is about 15 to 16%, and more than half of India's GDP is taken up by the service sector, and the industrial sector, which is the secondary sector, contributes more or less to the extent of 30%. And the main reason for this is the service sector does not require huge amount of capital investment. It is the intellectual power, and Indians are quite good as service providers. So that can be one reason why the service sector has grown largely in the Indian economy. And besides that, we also have topics with respect to the occupational distribution of population. This also is another important factor which is in favor of India, and that is the working age population in India, which is between say 18 years to 55 years is the highest in terms of demographics, which will again take our economy to a much higher growth path. And we have various other aspects connected to the population policy of India, the human resource development, and the human development index, which I spoke about previously. Now coming to the national income inequalities, so we will be understanding here various factors which were contributing to higher poverty levels and low employment in India when India was a developing country. And students, you all should know that India is no longer a developing country. Of course, it has not reached a state of a developed country also, but we are an emerging economy today where the income inequalities in India are reducing to a large extent, but still that divide between the haves and have-nots is there, and we have a lot of policies in place to remove these gaps in India. And we have income inequalities in India, magnitude, causes, consequences, and what remedial measures the government has been taken to reduce poverty and provide more employment. Here you need to know that the government is having a very open policy in terms of developing entrepreneurship in the country. So that can be also considered as a policy at present by the government to improve the employment opportunities in the country. And there are many programs for poverty alleviation and generation of employment in India. Moving on to planning and public policy. Ever since India got independent, till say about 2014, we were having the planning policy in place. But in the recent more than 5 or 6 years, the Niti Aayog has taken up the planning commission in India, and the full form of Niti Aayog is National Institution for Transforming India. I would like to give you one point of reference here is that as far as the planning commission is concerned, the planning done for India and the allocation of the distribution and allocation of funds was all controlled by the planning commission. The major difference between planning commission and Niti Aayog is that the planning is done by the Niti Aayog, and it is a think tank where they are taking inputs from different people who are involved in the progress of the country, different fields, as well as they make policies, but the entire distribution of funds, the finances are taken up by the Ministry of Finance. It does not mean that planning has gone away. Planning is very much there, but it is only taken up by the Niti Aayog. And then we talk about economic reforms. I'm sure you are aware that economic reforms in India started from 1991, and the three important aspects of that have been liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Liberalization refers to the government relaxing various rules and laws, and the some kind of de-licensing the government has gone in for to open businesses and other activities. Privatization is when the government is reducing its stake in a public sector enterprise and allowing not only private parties, private individuals within the country, but also foreign investments into the productive activities into the country. And globalization is when the entire world is getting converted into a global village. We say that it is converted into a global village because there is good, easy communication between countries, and trade activities are also a lot more freer. Of course, you have a lot of other points which you have to look into when we understand these economic reforms. Then we also have the rural-urban disparities, migration of labor that is coming up from rural India to urban India. You have a lot of aspects that you will be looking into in these topics. Now coming on to the agricultural sector. Now agricultural sector in India has played a very important role in India's development, and food security is the most important thing. As far as India is concerned, every year the food production is increasing, and we have enough reserves and stock of food to take care of the growing population in India, and at the same time we are also exporting food grains to the other outside countries. And the green revolution and the cropping pattern in India have brought in lot of changes in the way the production levels in India have increased. And you should know that green revolution technology was first applied in case of wheat, which also got extended to other important major food crops in India. Now moving on to the industrial sector. As I was telling you, the industrial sector has grown more or less at a similar level starting from what we had at the independence level. Yes, industries have adopted more better technology. We are going in for more computerization. The GDP has increased slightly in the industrial sector, but more or less it is good enough for the growth of the country. And besides the industrial sector growth, we have been giving a lot of preference to the small and micro enterprises. The medium enterprises are also included in that, and the government has had a lot of policies in terms of taking care of the sick industries. We have the Foreign Exchange Management Act, which was replaced by the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, and we have the Competition Commission, where the government focuses on free competition in terms of the production activities in different areas. The disinvestment policy of the government focuses on the fact that we are the disinvestment policy focuses on the fact that the government goes in for reducing its stakes in different public sector enterprises and allows private participation in the production activities. But are you aware what the government does when the government gets revenue from going in for disinvestment? This is one important thing that you need to keep in mind. As mentioned by Dr. Seema, when the government has a deficit in the budget, a lot of the deficit is taken care by the government's disinvestment program when it is disinvesting from different public sector enterprises. In various areas, the government has still kept the ownership when the ownership is more than 51%. But when the government reduces the ownership to less than 51%, it is giving complete ownership to the private participants or foreign investments happening in the country. And lot of changes are happening. Direct investments are being allowed in terms of infrastructure development, transport, energy, communication, information technology, but in all areas the government is keeping control. The government is having ownership in most of these investment projects that the government goes in for a direct investment from foreign and private sector. And you can look at a few of these questions as a model paper that we have prepared. An activity undertaken by directly using natural resources. And when we talk about natural resources, it means that we are referring to the primary sector or the agricultural sector. When we talk about natural resources, we are not using that for secondary or tertiary sector. The second one is, which of the following is not correctly matched? The Mini Ratna scheme is incorrect here, and the workers' social security scheme, new industrial policy, new agricultural strategy are all correctly given here. So this is more of a memory based question where you have to keep in mind, you can prepare a table, students, where you have a lot of these schemes, lot of acts, and you can give the correct years. So you can keep that in mind where you will be able to answer many memory based questions when you are answering your going in for your exams. Now there is one important question which is an assertion and reasoning based question, which is connected to the Human Development Index. Human Development Index, as I told you, is connected to the economic development in the country, as to what extent socio-economic development has happened. So that is the assertion. The reasoning says comparison of national income of two countries explains Human Development Index. So when we are talking about the national incomes of two countries, as I told you, it is purely connected to economic growth and not economic development. Therefore, the third choice where A is true but R is false, because A talks purely about economic development and R is a comparison between national incomes, is not economic development but it refers to economic growth. Therefore, it is a false option. Now coming on to the Telangana economy, like how we have understood about the Indian economy, we will take into consideration the mechanism in which all the three sectors contribute to the Telangana economy's GDP. There is a slight change here where the agricultural sector contributes about 20%, and the industrial sector is also more or less 20 to 22%, but the major contributor in Telangana economy is from the service sector. And when you talk about the service sector, it is mainly the IT and IT related services which have been contributing maximum to the GDP. So these are the most important features of the Telangana economy. When you take the demographic features, the urban and rural divide, the male-female ratio is almost more or less about 47% of rural people are in the urban areas. The remaining 53% are in the urban Telangana sector, and the occupation of population, almost half, that is the male and females, are also nearly 50-51% in terms of occupations in the Telangana economy. And this human resource development, education and health, there are a lot of policies and strategies of the government which have focused on the growth of human resources, which again are more of memory based questions where you can look into various government schemes that are there. Now coming to the gross state domestic product, where the government has focused on poverty, unemployment. The government has got many schemes in order to see that the state gross domestic product, how it has improved over the years, and what schemes are there for increasing employment opportunities and reducing your poverty levels. I think you are aware that we have a lot of schemes in Telangana where the government is having the Telangana hub, where it is encouraging more of entrepreneurship in Telangana economy. It is more of a hub where people can bring in their ideas and get better resolutions to be, or get better inputs to be future entrepreneurs. That is one very good policy of the government towards entrepreneurship development. And there are various other welfare programs about mother-child care, infant mortality, to reduce the infant mortality. Various schemes are there by the Telangana government which have been promoted. Now, as far as the agricultural sector is concerned, the cropping pattern, the agrarian structure, the land reform scheme in the Telangana economy has been taken up by the government in a very good manner, where the land distribution to landless farmers and agricultural laborers have been on priority by the government. And the agricultural marketing scheme is agricultural marketing scheme is also taking into consideration various aspects where the farm produce is reaching the markets without lot of involvement of the middlemen, so that the prices that the agricultural farmers get are also ideal for what they are producing, and at the end consumer point of view in the markets also, the prices are not very high when they are trying to eliminate the middlemen. Now coming on to the industrial sector, where the government has created a lot of special economic zones, and the small scale industries also have been given a lot of boost by the Telangana government, and the industrial sickness and industrial finances in Telangana also we have got a lot of schemes to take care of the growth of the small industries in the Telangana sector. Besides this, in the agricultural sector, the government has got the Mission Bhagirathi and Mission Kakatiya, which have recently been launched to take care of the irrigation facilities in the agricultural sector. Now coming to the service sector, as I told you, the service sector has grown, and we have got a separate area allocated for the information technology services, which have been growing at a very rapid level, and this service sector contributes to nearly 60% in the gross state domestic product. And the information technology and tourism are also improving by a large extent in our Telangana state. Now looking at a few questions that we have created for you, which of the following is not correctly matched? The TSTDC scheme was launched in 2014. The IP facilitation is not 2018, it is 2017, whereas V-Hub 2018, T-Hub 2015. Again, as I told students, these are memory based questions, so making a tabular representation of every scheme and the year next to that will be very helpful for you when you are preparing for your exams. The Telangana Academy for Skill and Knowledge task was established to work on which of the following areas. This was recently launched a few years ago, where the focus is on education, entrepreneurship and employability. Yeah, I will pass on to the next module to Dr. Seema to continue.
So we are with the 8th module students, and the 8th module is related to quantitative methods for economic analysis. So the module includes some bit of mathematics used for economic analysis, and we have also the statistical tools which can be used for economic analysis. So when we talk about mathematical equations used in economics, it is related to the relationship between the two economic variables. So whenever we talk about two economic variables, one will be the dependent variable and one will be the independent variable. So I'll just give you a small example. When we talk about law of demand, it shows the relationship between price and quantity demanded. So these are the two economic variables. So out of these two economic variables, which one is independent and which is dependent? Independent means it will move on its own. So when there is a change in the price of the commodity, it will have the effect on the quantity demanded. So price becomes the independent variable, and the price becomes the independent variable, and quantity demanded becomes the dependent variable. So whenever we study in economics, we will study the cause and effect relationship. So here we talk about two variables, but in reality when we do take up the studies, then there are different causes for the change in one variable. So that is what, when we put it in the form of an equation, linear equation, that is what we call it as use of mathematics for economic analysis. Then we have statistics. So when we talk about basic concepts of statistics, students, statistics is nothing but we are talking about the collection of numerical data. So when we say income, when we collect the data of income, suppose income of an individual, so that is called as numerical data. We talk about the data collected for consumption, that is again a numerical data. Sales is a numerical data. So there are different variables which can, or the different information which can be collected in the form of data, and when the data is analyzed, it will be analyzed with the help of statistics. So when we talk about statistics, we talk about two types of data, that is the primary and the secondary data. Now primary data means if we have to do certain analysis, if we are collecting the data on our own through observation or through questionnaire, then we call it as the collection of data through primary sources. But if you have to do some analysis, economic analysis, and we use already published data, then we call it as secondary sources of data. So again, students, when we are doing economic analysis, we can also, because we talk about economic analysis, So we can divide our data in the sense we can take the total population or we take the sample of the population. So now suppose if we are talking about this a small example, that suppose if we have to calculate the average marks of the student in the class. So we can take the data of every student in the class, ask what is the marks secured by them. So that is what we call it as population data. But if we select only few students, suppose there are 50 students and we collect the data only from 20 students. We collect the data from some students who have scored highest marks, some students who have scored average marks, and some students who might have scored poor marks. So we collect the data of these few students. Out of 50 we collect only 20. It means we have taken the sample out of the total population and use the statistical tools to make some economic analysis. Similarly, when we talk about measures of central tendency and dispersion, so there are mainly we have three central tendencies measures, which include median, which includes mean, which we call it as average. Median is the midpoint of the total frequency distribution, and mode is nothing but we are talking about how many times, which is the maximum number of times one particular frequency has been repeated. So these are the three measures of central tendency: mean, median and mode. And when we talk about standard deviation we are talking about that how the distribution or how near the distribution is near to the mean, or how far is the distribution to the mean. So standard deviation means we are talking about deviation from the mean. So we calculate the mean and see that how the frequency is near to the mean or how it is far from the mean. So when we talk about distribution of the frequency in statistics, it is very, very important that our frequency distribution is normally distributed in a bell shape. So most of the frequencies should be near to the mean, then the standard deviation will be less. Similarly, when you talk about correlation and regression, students, correlation, as the name suggests, we are talking about the relationship between the two economic variables. So two economic variables can be positively related or it can be negatively related. So positively related also, it can be low positive or it can be high positive. So the correlation between the two economic variables, the value varies from 0 to 1. So if we are calculating the correlation between the two variables and we get the value as 0.3. So if it is 0.3, it means that there is a relationship between the two, but the relationship is weak or it is low. Sometimes if we find out the relationship and it comes at 0.9, which means that they are related and there is high correlation between the two. Similarly, when we talk about regression is nothing but we are talking about again the impact of independent variables on the dependent variables. So I was explaining to you price and demand. So price is an independent variable, demand is a dependent variable. So if there is a change in the price, what is the effect on the demand? So that we can study under regression. So here I was giving example for two variables, but I think so all of you also know that demand has many other determinants. Like we talk about price, we talk about income, we talk about the prices of related goods, we talk about the taxes, advertisements, population. There are various factors which is affecting the demand. So when we are studying the demand and its factors and we include all the determinants in an equation, then we can study under multivariate regression analysis. Similarly, we talk about index and time series analysis. Students, this is very, very important when you talk about economics. When you talk about index, we are talking about the best example what we talk about is whole price index. That is, we are talking about the inflation, or we talk about consumer price index. That is related to the index which is being formed for calculation of inflation. Because students, when we talk about inflation, there are many commodities which are being sold and bought in the economy. So when we are calculating indexes, we will only take the important commodities for the calculation of index, and we will see the increase or decrease in the prices of only those commodities to calculate WPI or CPI. Another example, students, for indices we can give it, which is very common, which you call it as BSC index, which is we call it as Sensex. So in the stock market, in Bombay Stock Exchange, there are so many shares of the companies which are being traded every day, bought and sold every day. But when the Bombay Stock Exchange calculates its index, it will take only the important share values of the important companies, that is where the trading is more. So there are certain shares where the trading is more, so those are being taken into to calculate the Sensex. Similarly, we also have under National Stock Exchange indices which we call it as Nifty. And related to time series analysis, which is again very important in economics, is because all the economic variables are being recorded in the chronological order. So we say GDP of the country from 1950 to 2023. So everywhere we talk about the time series. And why again time is important, students, in economics is because whenever the government is implementing a policy, when the government implement the policy, its result will not be there and then, its results will be felt in the economy only after certain lag time. So if the government is implementing a policy today related to MSME, so the result of the implementation, the government can get the data on the same maybe after 3 months, 4 months, or even after 6 months. So in economics there is always a concept of time lag. So you start today, but the result is afterwards. So it is not automatic. That is why it is important for the economics students to understand about the time series. So here are the few questions which can be asked, which are the model questions which we have prepared under quantitative methods. So here again one is the sequence type question. When here it is written, and if the two variables are highly correlated, we expect the coefficient of regression of one on the other. So if it is highly correlated, it means the value is nearing 1. So here the answer says that it is to be highly statistically significant. So we are talking about that if the two variables are correlated, so we also find that the coefficient of regression can also be high. Similarly, when you talk about multivariate regression analysis, multivariate means, the name suggests multivariate, we are talking about there is one dependent variable, but there are more independent variables. Independent variables, as what we said, for demand it can be price, it can be income, it can be prices of related goods. There are many factors which is affecting demand. So when we talk about the independent variables, it can be n number of independent variables. So when we include those n number of independent variables, it becomes multivariate regression. So we can include n number of variables for multivariate regression. Similarly, as I told you, standard deviation is, we are talking about deviation from the mean. So the standard deviation of the sampling distribution of means is known as standard error. So there will be some frequency which will be far from the mean, some which will be very close to the mean, but when we make the distribution, when we plot these frequency, it should be in a bell shaped, which is that most of the frequencies should be closer to the mean. Yes, so the rest of the two modules will be taken by Jyothi Mehra.
Thank you, Dr. Seema. Now moving on to banking and economics for infrastructure. The first module here talks about commercial and central banks. So when you talk about the commercial banks, we are understanding types of commercial banks in India, the basic concept. If you look at the concept of commercial banks function just like business institutions, where their main motive is to earn profits by the lending policies of the commercial banks and whatever savings they are going to take of the general public. And the commercial banks in India are classified into public sector banks, private sector banks and foreign banks. And the functions of commercial banks are those which are with respect to advancing loans, accepting deposits from the public, and they also have a variety of agency services that you will be looking into. And the commercial banks follow the principles of sound lending when they are providing loans to the borrowers for different purposes. And when they are providing this credit under different rates of interest that they are basically multiplying credit, or the credit creation scheme of the commercial banks refers to the fact that when one deposit creates another deposit which is used by the commercial banks for lending. So almost to the extent of 5 times of the deposits, the credit creation takes place when we combine all the commercial banks together. They also have various social responsibilities that they have to undertake as commercial banks in the country. In contrast to this, the central banking functions related to the Reserve Bank of India in our country are not on profit motive, but the basic idea of the Central Bank of India is to see that economic growth of the country takes place, and they frame various policies for the commercial banks for their lending, and the regulation of all the commercial banks in India is carried out by the Reserve Bank of India. And the Reserve Bank of India has its monetary and credit policy which regulates the flow of credit and funds in the economy, and the instruments of monetary policy are classified into qualitative measures and quantitative measures. Now moving on to the second module here is about the financial and investment banking. Now the non-banking financial intermediaries are those intermediaries which are not carrying out the basic functions of a commercial bank of accepting money and giving money on as lending, loans and advances, but they have their own schemes for accept deposits, and they also have their own schemes where they are lending money for different activities for businesses in the country. The only difference is that the commercial banks are having certain strict regulations that they have to have all these policies that are there by the Reserve Bank of India for accepting deposits and lending money, which are not there for the non-banking financial intermediaries, but they are also regulated by the Reserve Bank of India. Then coming to development banks are a different category of banks which focus on providing long-term loans for the financing the requirements of agriculture, business and industry in the country. And these development banks not only provide loans to different areas in different sectors, but they are also subscribing to the shares and debentures of different companies. And as far as the development banks are concerned, we have got development banks specifically in the agricultural sector, which is the Apex Bank. I'm sure you have heard about NABARD, the National Bank for Agricultural and Rural Development. Then we also have the Small Industries Bank in India, again the Apex Bank, which regulates the activities of all the other banks for which provide loans for small scale industries, which is Small Industries Development Bank of India, SIDBI. Similarly, we have got the Industrial Finance Corporation of India, which is the development bank for the industrial sector. Then merchant banking is another subsidiary that any commercial bank can have, where they are acting as mediators. When a company is going public, they act as mediators between the company and the regulator of the capital market, which is Securities and Exchange Board of India. Moving on to our third part, which is money market and capital markets. The two important classification of the financial markets are money markets and capital markets. Money markets are the markets where funds are borrowed and lent for short-term credit, or money is borrowed and lent for a short period of time, ranging between an overnight loan which can go up to 364 days, and all the commercial banks and the Reserve Bank of India are an integral part of the money market in India. And a few of these money market instruments include bills of exchange, commercial paper, certificate of deposits, which are all near money instruments. Moving on to the capital market is the market where long-term funds are borrowed and lent for again trade purposes, and the capital markets are classified into primary markets and secondary markets. The primary market is the market where any company which wants to go in for issue of shares issues shares for the first time. That is why it is called the new issue market. And once SEBI approves that the company has gone in for issue of shares in a proper manner with the help of the merchant banker, these stocks and shares are then moving on to the secondary market for regular trading. That is where the stocks and shares are either getting a higher price, lower price, they are earning profits, or they are incurring, or they are even making losses. So all these activities take place in the secondary market of the capital market, which is also called as the old issue market. And the stock exchanges are all a part of your secondary market, which is where regular trading for stocks and shares take place. And the regulator of the capital market is Securities and Exchange Board of India, where you will understand a lot of functions and powers of SEBI to regulate the activities of the stock exchanges in our country. And regulator of the money market is the Reserve Bank of India. Moving on to infrastructure and economic development, we will look into various areas where public utilities are created by the government. The government spends money on development of infrastructure such as roads, your overhead bridges, ports, for making sure that the businesses are facilitated in the country. And at the same time, we also have various social infrastructure schemes of the government where they are investing money on education, health, hygiene and other areas for the overall development of the individuals and taking the welfare motive into consideration. And we also have human resources development, where the government has policies wherein they are focusing on education and training of the students as well as who are graduating from their institutions and are ready for working in different sectors. Then moving on to physical infrastructure, which includes the concept of energy sources, renewable and non-renewable sources of energy. I hope you are aware the basic difference between renewable and non-renewable sources of energy. Non-renewable sources of energy are the ones which cannot be renewed, which will deplete on use, that's such as oil, gas, coal, whereas renewable sources of energy include your solar power and other areas which can be renewed and which can be used again and again. And most of the economies in the world are focusing on developing the renewable sources of energy because the non-renewable sources are getting depleted. And we also have the power sector, the airways, waterways under the physical infrastructure. And a few questions that you can see here is we have matched the following questions where we are matching the government budget, central bank, public goods and commercial banks. So the right matching for the government budget is credit, your allocation, distribution and stabilization function. Similarly for the other three you can just look into and please try and do questions similar to this, students. And we also have the match the list where we have got different schemes or different banks, the development banks, regional rural banks, and the years have to be remembered by you, students. And the last module is about economics of environment. Now here we focus on various aspects referring to the relationship between the ecology of the environment and the economy as a whole, where we take into consideration microeconomics, Pareto optimality, market failure. I will just give you a small idea here. When the government goes in for different schemes for benefiting the country, they take into consideration Pareto optimality. When they are giving certain benefits to certain, like if they are developing some kind of an infrastructure, if they are displacing some people by developing that infrastructure, the government sees that whatever benefit is derived by the overall community, it should be higher than the disbenefit or the losses that are there for the different communities who are displaced. So we can look into various examples here in terms of externalities, effects and meaning of biodiversity. And moving on to resource allocation, we have got exhaustible, non-exhaustible resources under the natural resources, where we will be looking at the meaning, features and classification. And the environmental valuation focuses on the direct and indirect methods of degradation of land, soil, and how the government focuses on preserving the natural resources, especially the forests. And sustainable development, as we have already discussed in our module earlier, that we are not taking away the resources, or we are not using up resources in a manner where we are not allowing the future generations to use them. We are not taking resources from the present and letting resources to be used by generations to come. Moving on to the environmental pollution and policies, the government has lot of schemes and policies in place to take care of the pollution in the country. And we've got a few questions in terms of match the following, where we have taken the SDGs, limits to growth, the Silent Valley movement, the Chipko movement, again, which are memory-based questions. You have to go through them and keep them in your mind, students, and understanding what the greenhouse gas effect is. And also the first Forest Act was introduced in the year 1980. With this, we come to the end of all the 10 modules under economics paper 2. So we thank TSAT to give us this opportunity to give you a little view and overview about all the subjects under economics. Thank you.